Yep, I do indeed. Okay, we're recording now, so I'll just once again reintroduce myself. I'll get in the view of the camera here, and I should also adjust the. I'll do this a little bit later as we proceed, so we can see Jim at least, and maybe some of the other participants by Zoom. If you're not aware, everybody who is remotely attending here virtually, such as David and Jim Blakely, and of course Jim Gregory himself, they can see this same screen, and they can also adjust the roster of participants. I've minimized it now so you don't see any of them, but you can see either just the speaker, or you can see a limited selection, or you can see the whole thing and adjust the window so you can see just about everybody here. But I will tell you the ability to have an in-person gathering here like we're doing now, and also projected out to Jim Blakely, for example, is in Texas right now. I think that that is such a great capability, and I'm so glad we're able to do that. And I'm glad you're all able to be here today as well. If you haven't yet signed the sign-up sheet, please do. If you'd like to purchase one of Jim's books, we have, there are actually 5 books that Jim has authored, and I own 4 of them. For some reason, I missed one of them. Whoops, I just grabbed the video camera here too. Let me go ahead and put that back up here to where they can see you folks. There we go. Okay, that should take in the room. Jim, one of Jim's and my favorite books of his is Will This Be on the Test? He's a collection of the stories of his experience in 30 years of teaching high school, European history, U.S. history, and so on at Arroyo Grande High School, Mission College.
They're going to have to go to their full brilliant team concept tonight.
Somebody should be muting themselves. This is not coming from here. One of our participants is a book that Jim has also authored is Patriot Graves, describing in some detail the experience of dozens of men. He can tell you exactly how many who were buried in Arroyo Grande Cemetery. They migrated out here west from the blood-soaked fields of the South, and well, these were mostly Union, almost all, in fact, Union veterans who decided to come to live in the Arroyo Grande Valley in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and on. And they have a remarkable legacy. So I highly recommend this book. And if you'd like to actually visit those graves with Jim on a guided tour, go to the Cuesta College community programs, sign up for either of the 2 tours he's going to be conducting at the Arroyo Grande Cemetery, June 19th or 26th. That's a Sunday afternoon, and the details are all there. It costs like 10 or 15 bucks, but it's a nominal cost for I'm sure what will be a great tour. I've signed up already for the one on June 26th. Jim is a walking encyclopedia about not just those Union veterans and the battles they fought in and the cause that they served, but he also has a thorough knowledge of the buildings in Arroyo Grande, and you're going to hear about some of them that are connected to some very important aviators and their families here. Jim has also published one of the most popular books in our collection here at the bookshop, and that is San Luis Obispo County Outlaws, Desperados, Vigilantes, and Bootleggers. I used this book, along with the book by Pete Kelly in here, The Quick and the Dead, to do a tour of the Mission Plaza. And we're relaunching that this summer. This is a little flyer. I haven't yet folded this one, but this is the one I'm going to use to excuse me, I'm going to get in front of the camera here, to send out to around town. And there's a little sign out in front too. Hopefully we'll have some people showing up tomorrow and through the summer to do a little tour. We start here and then we go down to the mission. We talk about 1846 war with Mexico and the appearance of John C. Fremont. And we also talk about the sad story of the vigilantes in the Committee of Vigilance in 1858. So Jim, again, is just a thorough and I think especially humorous, self-deprecating kind of guy, and I'll ask him to say a few words here in his own defense. And let me get your image up here on the Zoom here, Jim, and go ahead and start talking anytime.
Okay, I hope you can see me because I crawled under the desk during John's introduction. Just a couple of words. For one, thank you so much for your forbearance. I am getting over the regular of all colds. And at this point on Wednesday, I had no voice at all. So I'm happy to have just a little bit of one. Like most people of my generation, I love movies. And one of the reasons I write books, in fact, it was just on Turner Classic Movies not too long ago. A film you may have seen with Gregory Peck called 12 O'Clock High. And I identified not with Peck's tough squadron commander, but with Dean Jagger, who was the base adjutant. He was a pencil pusher, which is what my father was in World War II. He was a quartermaster officer in London. So many of the aviators that I write about in the book served in England. And I am constantly braced by learning what my mother and father went through in the war years, which is why I keep returning to that subject. I do not fly. I love airplanes. My father was a comptroller for Madonna Construction for 20 years. So my first airplane flight was in Mr. Madonna's Beechcraft Aero Commander with Earl Thompson at the controls. My dad was bidding a job in Marysville. And he invited me and my big brother Bruce to fly along. It was unlike any airplane flight I've had since because you could actually see stuff. The farm fields of the San Joaquin Valley, Highway 99. We flew over the mothball fleet. It was just incredible. And I think that's where my love for airplanes began. I also, my sons and I were regulars when they had the P-51. Mustang fly-in at Santa Maria Airport. We've visited both the B-17 Sentimental Journey and the tragic B-17 909, which crashed tragically a couple of years ago when they flew into McChesney Field. A guy I worked for in high school, the co-publisher of the Five Cities Times Press Recorder, Kent Blankenberg, had a Lockheed Electra. That was a later version of the famed airplane that Amelia Earhart flew on her last trip. And somebody left the hangar door open one day. And there that airplane was, all gorgeous and silver. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. So I'm a kind of an airplane nut. On the other hand, I could never imagine doing what young men did. You are locked into an airplane. You are utterly vulnerable, especially to flak. And then you fly on a mission that may last 8, 10, or 12 hours. If you're a B-24 pilot, a tough airplane to fly, no power steering, you lost an average of 5 to 10 pounds on a typical combat mission. There were frequent problems with the oxygen systems, the so-called P tubes, often froze. It was arduous, it was exhausting. And I just, again, I don't know how young men did what they did. The final observation I want to make is what struck me about them after the war. And these were warriors, but to a man and woman, the people I learned about were gentle people. What I needed to write more about is named Everett Blakely, who will be featured in a Spielberg Tom Hanks production, Masters of the Air, that's coming up soon. Blakely was probably the single most decorated flyer, Silver Star and Distinguished Flying Cross, who was from our county in World War II. And the wood shop in his garage was a favorite hangout for teenage kids who were working on Eagle Scout projects or gifts for their parents for Father's Day or Mother's Day. That's the kind of man he was. Chester Eckerman, a P-38 pilot. I am a passionate, if not too skillful cook. Eckerman, and you'll meet him in the presentation, that's the thing he loved to do the most in his retirement, to cook for his friends and his wife's friends when they came over. John Sims Stewart.
There you go.
Cal Poly professor who recently passed away, met his wife, Mary, in the Hopscotch Inn in Pierce, South Dakota in 1944. And they were married for some 70 years. And it's a great love story. He named his P-47.
I don't know how to enlarge it.
Stewart, Mary Stewart, Queen of Scots. Al Finley, who became a dear friend of mine, was shot down twice during World War II, became a lifetime Air Force non-com. And on retirement, his hobby was collecting, along with his wife, antiques. And finally, a man I greatly admire, Elwin Rigetti, who was called Eager El because he was a little fast on the trigger. His last combat mission, in which he sacrificed his life, before the P-51 squadron took off, Elwin Rigetti called one of the pilots aside. He was an old man. This was his last mission. Rigetti, on the previous mission, had lost a married man. It was that man's last mission. Rigetti told the young pilot, I don't want to do that again. As soon as we reach the target, you are to turn around and hightail it back to base. You will have completed your combat missions and you can go home. The irony, of course, was that was not only Elwin Rigetti's birthday, that was the day he more than likely died. So this generosity of spirit is something that constantly informs me, and it's a theme that seems to run throughout the stuff I write about World War II. I want to thank finally the Central Coast Veterans Museum, because the starting point for the book was the remarkable interviews that they've recorded of World War II veterans that are now on file with the National Archives Veterans Memory Project. And there's a website, you can go back, you can find people, locate them by their county where they lived when they were interviewed, and here's some incredible stories. So John, that's about all I have to say for right now. Thank you for the introduction.
Jim, yeah, let's give him a round of applause, shall we? I couldn't help but notice, am I being heard? I hope so. I couldn't help but notice there's several people in the audience here with the last name of Rigetti. Would you mind raising your hands, folks? Rigettis in the audience? Here they are. They're right there. And that's a proud name to have around here. For the reasons you're going to find out, we're going to run Jim's slideshow, take about an hour. But if you have any questions, and you'll occasionally be hearing me read some of what's up on the screen because it goes by pretty quickly. But if you need to get a little bit closer, we have one more chair up here too, if you'd like to. And I'm going to go ahead and run the PowerPoint, and Jim, you may want to narrate the first couple of slides here because the audio didn't come through, but there we go.
Okay. I'm also the president of the South County Historical Society. So that's a little plug for us. We're just a little society. But thanks so much to the History Center for making the lecture possible. And there's the book. It was a labor of love. This is not a word. So English teachers out there, I grew up with Dizzy Dean, who said he slid into third base. The Outlaws book was the funnest book for me to write. Funnest is not a word. This was the book that for some reason or another was the most personal. Okay, John, take it away.
Yeah, Jim, can you see on your screen? Can you see the share? Oh, I didn't set it up yet. Hold on.
Okay.
I've got it's showing for us, but I'm gonna start it back over again. and resume share. There we go. Okay,
Okay,
now you can see it.
right. This is
That's
what I
you.
actually look like.
Actually, you look better than that, Jim.
Thank you.
Maybe it's because you have a hat on and not the ice bag.
I think you should see more dogs next.
And I believe these slides will automatically advance. Apparently
may
not. Let me,
Yeah, the first few you may have to.
May have to advance.
There you go.
Wait a second. Nope, I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. There we
There
go.
they are. Our Irish setters. That's Bridget and Molly. You may have heard them just come in. Molly looks a little worried about me. And then that's my Basset Hound, Wilson. Excuse me, Walter.
Walter, I was gonna say. Let me just see if this will, yeah, there we go.
There we go.
And
Now,
your
John,
voice will come in over our speakers in just a
I
minute.
still don't see this. I don't see any slides.
You don't? Okay, hold on. We'll pause it for just a second until we can make sure you.
What view do we need to
Were
be?
several years behind the Wright brothers, so they're not exactly equals, they're counterparts. But it was Lincoln.
Okay, you should be able to not only hear slides, see slides, but hear an audio that Jim has recorded to accompany the slides. So people,
I hear the audio, but not the image.
Jim, you may need to adjust the,
Does anybody see the slides that's not in the audience there?
Yes,
Sylvan?
they're fine.
So I think what you need to do, Jim, is adjust the roster of the participants there. In fact, you can minimize that entirely if you go up to the top of the little roster window and click on the little dashed lines on the top on the far left. It'll minimize it entirely. Try that.
You're talking about in the view menu.
Yeah.
In the view, it's either choice of speaker or gallery.
No, it should be gallery. Yeah, choice of speaker. You've got a little bit different Zoom setup, I think there.
Dan, you might try the window menu. There's a Zoom meeting and then there's a Zoom window.
These were
Zoom
several
window.
years behind the Wright brothers, so they're not exactly equals.
Oh, come here.
Just go ahead and everything he says is important. So
Okay.
he'll paint a picture for us.
We have the Zoom window minimized, so there are only two screens and you're on one of them there, Jim, but hopefully you'll be able to get back up because it is sharing for everybody else. So I'm going to go ahead and resume the.
These were several years behind the Wright brothers, so they're not exactly equals, they're counterparts. But it was Lincoln who first got bitten by the flying bug, and he flew dirigibles like this one in the Bay Area. This is something that appeared in a local newspaper. Very Lincoln-like, very consistent with his personality, especially about the part about Beachy cut entirely loose from the rope and headed the messenger toward the Berkeley Hills.
Well,
Unfortunately, he evidently came back. And a few years later, here's two airships or dirigibles in a race. And that's Lincoln's in the distance. You can see the pilot in the nearer dirigible and the hot air balloon above both of them. They steered the contraption by straddling the struts below it, which looks pretty dangerous to me. Hillary, the older brother, was actually the first to make the move from airships to what we call airplanes about 1910. So he would have been a novice pilot when this picture was taken at a Los Angeles air meet that year. And Los Angeles then, as it would be for years, was a center for the aircraft industry. But Hillary was soon outstripped by his little brother. And the comment by Orville Wright probably tells you why. He was a natural. And as shown from this photograph, he was also a raging extrovert. Before he finally did marry in Michigan, it's said that Lincoln left a trail of engagement rings behind him. So he was, in many respects, kind of a daredevil. Here he is about to perform a loop over San Francisco. Anybody can fly over Niagara Falls. Why not fly over the falls and then under the bridge? And I guess Lincoln was something of, for lack of a better term, a sex symbol. And he pushed that daredevil bit as far as he could take it. In 1914, he raced Barney Oldfield on the ground, and we actually have footage of one of those races at the Iowa State Fair. Now, before you place your bets, Lincoln won by 1 lap, although I'm not sure how they counted the laps. There goes Barney. And here comes Lincoln in his airplane based on a Curtiss design. Seems to kind of lose his focus there. There he is. And here is the young man at the controls of his aircraft. This was the same year he became the first aviator to perform a loop. But it was older brother Hillary who flew the first airplane over San Luis Obispo County, July 4th, 1910. It was the airplane was on exhibit in a storefront downtown San Luis Obispo before it was taken out to the baseball field outside of town for its first flight on July 4th. Which sure beat the band concert and the potato sack races. And here's what it looked like. That's Rigetti Hill, which is appropriate given our aviation history. I love this photograph because it really does show, like the San Francisco film still, kind of a changing of the guard. The edges of the photograph, you can see people gathered. There are even a few cowboys in the distance. And there is Hillary Beach just to the right center of the photograph. And here it is with some very recognizable features in the distance. The first flight over San Luis Obispo. There were very heavy winds that day, so Hillary had to cut the flight short. So the organizers of the July 4th celebration cut his salary in half too. But it was a first. 6 months later, it was almost a last. And who put the barn up? Hillary would live into old age, but Lincoln, the more glamorous of the brothers, wouldn't. This is at the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco in 1915. This shows his takeoff in a monoplane. Here's another angle. Thousands of spectators. And Lincoln attempted to perform a loop, which he'd done many times before. But halfway through the maneuver, he realized that he'd started too low. When he tried to correct his mistake, the wings of the monoplane snapped. He plunged into San Francisco Bay. He was fished out of the water, still at the controls of his monoplane, by sailors from the battleship Oregon, buried in 30 feet of bay water and mud. That was the end of Lincoln Beachey's career and the end of an incredible pilot.
Risky business.
Yes, it was.
These were several years behind the Wright brothers, so they're not exactly equals, they're counterparts. But it was Lincoln who first got bitten by the flying bug, and he flew dirigibles like.
I'm gonna have to. I got
Is
Confused here. Hold it.
There you go.
I'm gonna go back one. Somehow,
Yeah, go back to Harriet.
back to Harriet. Okay. There we go. Harriet Quimby lived in Arroyo Grande for a short time and liked it here. In 1906, during a ride with racing driver. 1910, she found a new passion. Met with journalist turned aviator. Amelia Earhart at Cal Poly, 1936.
Rudy became, during the 1950s and 60s, a senior pilot for TWA. And that photograph is a happy one, taken soon after his marriage to a stewardess, Dorothy Newton. Truesdale flew for TWA for 29 years. He was married to Dorothy for 60. And one of his, probably his plum assignments was as a pilot who flew super constellations on transcontinental flights. There's a video clip of one of those planes taking off from an airport in Australia.
Flames are from the superchargers, so you have to devise a vent system to in the away from the engine.
Jim, did you want to repeat that at all?
Yeah,
Sid Varian from Housing.
Sorry, go ahead.
The Super Constellation was kind of the pride of TWA, and if you notice the flames, those are from the superchargers, and they invented a venting system to divert the flames away from the exhaust of the engine. But it was pretty spectacular to see one of those take off, especially at dusk.
Yeah, it's an incredible video.
Brother Russell earned 2 degrees from Stanford. Sig dropped out of Cal Poly. Seemed to be kind of aimless until he discovered flying. And he was so good at it that he became a pilot with TWA's arch rival, Pan American Airways. He would pioneer flights to Mexico and Central America in this airplane, a Ford trimotor. Here's a promotional clip from a transcontinental trip in a Ford trimotor about 1930. It fibs just a little bit. For one thing, that the trip took 48 hours because it was partly by plane and partly by train. But it's still fun to look at.
Pulls into Port Columbus, where our first day's flying will begin. The big tri-motor all-metal plane is ready and waiting. Its roomy cabin is well lighted and heated in wintertime. Seated in our comfortable chairs, we are all set now to see America best. The field rushes by. Then all is flowing smoothness. And now, ahead of us, we can see the train on which we left New York. It remains ahead of us for only a moment or two.
Well, sadly, illness forced Sig to retire from Pan Am, but there was Russell to contend with, so he joined forces with his brother. That's Russell on the left and Sig on the right.
Right.
And the two were fascinated by electronics. And no matter what their pedagogical background, the two were geniuses. In fact, they began to develop something called a klystron. And this would represent an exponential leap in radar technology.
Yes.
And for us historians, the real kicker was the role it played on world history 6 years later. Brothers' experiments in electronics that had begun in Halcyon, California in 1934 and would continue in what we call Silicon Valley today, where they would found an electronics firm after the war. Those experiments would make the difference 6 years later. They would be a turning point in the Battle of Britain in 1940, because it was British radar that detected the presence of oncoming German bombers.
How do I do that?
Gave the Royal Air Force Fighter Force time to scramble, intercept.
I could pause for just a second here too. I wanted to point out that the story of Russell and Sig Varian is so important. We're actually devoting this room to an exhibit that the materials are already downstairs. We're going to have it up probably within a couple of weeks or less. So come back to the History Center and check out Russell and Sigurd Varian. We actually have one of those klystron tubes, which was an essential physics and electronics experiment that was required in order to synchronize the waves returning from an object that was moving in the air in order to assist monitoring for radar systems. And as Jim just pointed out here, that led directly to the development of radar just in time for the Battle of Britain, just in time for Winston Churchill and the RAF to take the Luftwaffe out of contention in their attempt to take Britain out of the war. So,
And their niece will make an appearance shortly later in the presentation, John.
okay, Sheila, right, with her story of the flying Arabians, is that right?
Yes.
Anyway, we'll go ahead. Now we have a theme from American Beauty. I hope this is resuming. I think it is. Yeah, let me see what's going on here. Sorry, folks, we're okay. Our turn was next. When war came to America, it came from the air, as we all know, December 7th, 1945. Okay, let me try. It does say I shouldn't have to start it again. Oh, here we go. That's it. Okay. we're good. Many Americans had to find an atlas to locate Hawaii. Shocked churchgoers like the Acadas Methodists heard the news as they came home. Acadas are still a prominent family in the Rio Grande Valley. This painting still hangs in the Methodist church down there, Jim?
I think it does.
Jack Scruggs was a sailor, one of two sailors from Rio Grande on the battleship Arizona. This should be sounds of the musicians there.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Wayne Morgan and Jack Scruggs. That's the moment that their ship was destroyed. Wayne Morgan's Ford Agency in 1931, outside of Doc Bernstein's ice cream lab.
Huh? There's a zoom from the History Museum. What? What? Yeah. Yes. Well, I kind of forgot about it, and then I happened to look, and it. Yeah.
Somebody is unmuted there. Hold on. We're gonna zip past this. Yes, okay. And move on. It's having trouble picking up the next slide. There we go. Are we back on course here, Jim?
That's good.
Chester Edmond from Orchid. This is one of the interviews, Jim, from the Central Coast Veterans Museum.
They did a marvelous job.
To a contract primary training school run by Ryan Aircraft Corporation, and they trained in PT-22s, and I arrived there, or our class arrived there in early November of 1942, and we were there 2 months, and then we were reassigned to basic training, which was at Gardner Field at Taft, California. And the basic training aircraft was a BT-13.
I think so. I think
They called it the Vultee Vibrator. It was made by Vultee Aircraft.
if it's not up there, are you sure it's not up there?
It did shake.
I'm going to narrate this, Jim. Not all the aviators.
Programs that we have today, ranging from AutoCAD to culinary arts, they have their origin with this man. Tremendously energetic and tremendously passionate about teaching auto shop. Many of Al's students have told me he was their favorite teacher in high school. If they were the kind of kid who might have gotten into trouble, he was the guy who kept them in school. And he was absolutely keen on passing on his enthusiasm for automobile mechanics to his students. And of course, like most of us at one time, Al was a high school student, but it was in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. This is from the 1940 yearbook. There he is underneath the arrow in a senior class play. He was not a drama student, even then. This is his epitaph from his high school yearbook. Over a motor, he will often pose, experimenting, tormenting, on through life he goes. So even at the age of 18, he already had that enthusiasm for mechanics that he would pass on to a couple of generations of Royal Grande High School students. So he was drafted. This is 1940, and in 1944, the Army Air Forces gave him not one engine, but 4 B-17 engines. He was a flight engineer in the 457, oh my goodness. I actually was in the middle of I'm sure it was a fascinating lecture about the 30 Years' War to my European history students when I heard a B-17 from 2 miles off. I ran outside in the middle of the lesson plan and was jumping up and down like an idiot, which is not unusual for me. And I said, it's a B-17, it's a B-17. And it was so exciting. I just love airplanes. This is another reason I wrote this book. This is 21-year-old Al Spearling. He was a flight engineer in the 457th Bomb Group, which meant that he was responsible for hydraulics, for the electrical system, obviously for the engines themselves, and most importantly for the crew members, because they were flying at 25,000 feet. Al kept the oxygen system going. So he sat right behind the pilot and co-pilot. His position was in the top turret, which is significant. So he was both a flight engineer and top turret gunner, twin 50 caliber machine guns. And on his lucky 13th mission, he was in an airplane called Georgia Peach. And there's the flight manifest that day, Al Spearling, TT, top turret gunner. And I say lucky because, of course, it wasn't. This almost happened to Georgia Peach. These are 2 B-17s in a horrific collision over their base in England. What happened is that the B-17 above Al's, above Georgia Peach, hit some prop wash and dropped like a proverbial stone. Al was in the top turret, looked up. He said later, I could count the rivets in its bomb bay doors. So the 2 planes very nearly ran into each other, just as those other 2 planes had. It was nearly a disaster. Somehow Peach made it to the target, dropped her bomb load, turned around and began to head back home. And of course, the day was not over. What I found in research is what airmen feared the most, and justifiably so, because they couldn't fight back, was flak, German explosive shells that were pre-fused to explode at a certain height and send shards of metal through the airplane. Well, the flak burst directly next to Al Spearling took out the 2 left engines, number 1 and number 2 engine. And Georgia Peach went from 25,000 feet over Berlin. By the time she hit the coast, she was at 500 feet and dropping. That's when the pilot called out, Al, for God's sake, do something. So Spearling had a hunch. He crawled beneath the pilots and co-pilot seats and into the opening that the flak burst had left. And there he found the 2 throttle cables to the number 1 and number 2 engines. They were severed, lying right there on the flight deck. And he did what any good mechanic would do in that situation. He yanked on them as hard as he could. And the engine started, and Peach made it home. This is a photograph from the American Air Museum of Britain of Georgia Peach that day. And you notice how close the collision was? There's her tail. She made it back to base thanks to Al Spearling. He was a smoker then, as many young men were. He said, when we landed, my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the cellophane off my pack of Lucky Strikes. He would go on, as a result of that mission, to win a Distinguished Flying Cross, an Air Medal with oak leaf clusters. And of course, the best thing about Al Spearling, his students never knew any of this. He never talked about it. Thankfully, when he did, it was near the end of his life in a recorded interview with the Central Coast Veterans Museum. Just an extraordinary man.
35 missions. And all of them were men. This slide was actually created about 3 years ago, Jim. I think we've got an update on this toward in
Yes,
just
we
another
do.
couple of minutes. We'll go ahead and play it out here. Dorothy Rooney. I love that. Avenger Field. That plane, Jim, or that AT-6 Texan.
Yeah, it's an advanced trainer that student flyers would trade in before they graduated to their actual airplanes, their combat airplanes.
So the women were testing the training planes.
Hey,
And-
the men cost a lot.
Yeah.
She actually, her engine quit once at 8,000 feet, and she started losing altitude, and she patiently went through her AT-6 Texan restart checklist, which is about 26 steps. Nothing happened. She was sitting on her parachute, which they weren't trained to use. She remembered that a WASP from Santa Barbara, Betty Pauline Stein, had died a few weeks before when she bailed out of her Texan over the Mojave Desert. So she decided to stay with her airplane. So she went through her checklist again, all 26 steps. Nothing happened. And then for some reason, she had a toggle switch for the carburetor heater, which had absolutely nothing to do with restarting a stalled AT-6 Texan. The engine caught, and she made it home.
Wow. Amazing. Whoops. Sorry, sometimes it's 38 WASPs died in the line of duty. Oops, sorry, I'm going to try to. Just a second. I want to go back to this because I think at the end of this, Jim, you added something about Dorothy Moulton Rooney. And I want to make sure people know.
Thanks, Jim. I have to admit, women's history is something that's pretty important to me.
Yeah, yeah. So let me go back one more.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, that. I just we got bounced out of this, but I want to make sure we go back to where we left off.
There you go. That's about right.
Okay. So look at this slide, guys. The Army refused to pay for a female pilot's burial. So their fellow pilots pitched in to take a collection to ship their friend's body home. And then one of them would accompany them.
And Hazel Ying Lee was one of two Chinese American WASP pilots.
Yeah, imagine the courage they had. They even had to pay their own expense home.
Sydney,
after-
stop. Sydney,
Sorry. These women were amazing. Sorry.
Sydney, stop.
There's her airplane. Yeah, 103 years old. And her funeral is tomorrow?
It's tomorrow at the Methodist Church in Los Osos.
Wow. $103 old. 135 San Luis Obispo County men were killed. 18 aviators. Half died in accidents, half died in combat and war. From Papua New Guinea to Plessis, Romania. Theodore Lee. I wonder if he was named after Theodore Roosevelt. James Pearson of Templeton, navigator for the Mission Belle, shot down over Belgium the day after Christmas during the Battle of the Bulge. Clarence Ballach, Arroyo Grande, B-17, flew into the side of a mountain in England's Lake District in 1943. Fragments of the plane remain on that mountain today. He was a valedictorian at Arroyo Grande High School. Elmer Hagerman, Paso Robles, killed in a navigation training exercise in 1944 from Texas. Crash near Chase Field, all 7 crew and passengers perished. Lauren Bubar, San Francisco bombardier and then 338th Bomb Squadron, killed when a German fighter collided with his plane during a mission to Frankfurt. Paul Norman Hoover from Templeton died in 1945. Crash landing at Hancock Field in Yorkshire. The mission was scrubbed because of weather. His plane was the only one lost that day. And here's Elwin Rigetti. Jim, do you want to talk about Mr. Rigetti here?
Just an extraordinary young man. For some reason, dairy families seem to produce great pilots. The McChesney family produced Jess Milo McChesney, who flew 35 combat missions in a B-24 out of North Africa and Italy. And Elwin's brother, was also a B-24 pilot. And as I mentioned, that was not an easy airplane to fly. It was
Actually, Jim, I think we may have a correction on that. He flew a different plane?
his brother. I'm sorry, John, say
Oh,
again.
yeah, I'll repeat that for you. We're informed by one of the Rigettis here. Your first name is? Elizabeth Rigetti says that Roger was his cousin, not his brother.
His cousin. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I appreciate that.
Jim does not mind being corrected.
Not at all. Not at all. We want to get it right. But
Yeah.
the B-24,
One second, Jim, sorry. Elizabeth? Hang on just a second. Let me get that far. Maurice was Elwin's brother, survived into the 80s, and he flew what plane?
I believe it was a B-24.
A B-24. Not Elizabeth isn't sure, but Jim may have done some research on this. Elizabeth thinks he flew over the high road into China from Burma. Is that was a very, very dangerous route. Ah, wow. So that's your father we're looking at right here.
Both brothers have a display case at the Central Coast Veterans Museum. And if you haven't visited that museum, it is a treasure.
Elwin and Maurice both.
Yes, they do. And of course, Elwin was the commander
And
of
Roger
the
as well.
55th Fighter Group, and a terrific book called Vanished Hero was one of my sources for the book that I wrote.
What was the name of that book again, Jim?
Vanished Hero by Jeff Stout.
Jeff Stout. Okay.
Will help me in my research.
And by the way, I wanted to mention that Jim gave me a little printout here. I've printed out about 12 pages of sources for his book. So if anybody would like to take that afterward, or if you want, we will send out a link to that document so you can just get the same sources that Jim used for his book. We'll send that out along with an evaluation of this lecture too, a little bit later. Anything more you wanted to add about Elwin? I know he was the one case I used in our marketing for this lecture tonight too. So
It's just incredibly tragic that of the 18 aviators that we lost, 3 of them left little girls behind who were just learning to walk.
Yeah, that was you.
And Lieutenant Colonel
And you
Rigetti,
were one.
his daughter
Okay.
was one of them.
Well, Elizabeth, he was a man we would have all liked to get to know better. Well, we'll go on from here and keep thinking about Elwin and all the folks that were so much a part of this legacy.
There's Kyle.
Oh, that's you. Okay, that's you. Yeah.
We had the honor of sitting near Kyle at the presentation at the Dalladea Adobe.
That's right. You were there on April 30th when we had our award ceremony. This picture was okay. You don't look terribly happy there, I would have to say. How many sisters did he have? He had 3 sisters and 2 brothers, Maurice and Ernie, your dad. Okay. Yeah. Well, like I said, it's a well-known name around here, not only the high school and the Hill, but lots of other places. Cuesta College. Yeah. Yeah, avocados, indeed. Yeah. Pat Mullen is here too, by the way, from the Cuesta College board. Pat just reminded me that he was a major figure in the development of Cuesta College too. Ernie, yeah. So we have this number that are so telling about the risks that the aviators felt, that for every American infantryman killed, 3 were wounded, just the opposite for the airmen. there are 3 killed for every 1 wounded. So if you went down in a plane, your chances of survival, even if wounded, were pretty slim. All right, we'll keep going here. Whoops, Jim, let me make sure I've got,
John.
yeah, okay. I love these background, slide backgrounds. We're almost finished here, I think, folks. Well, we're getting a little closer. Here you go, Jim.
Poly pretty much shut down during World War II. It went down to about 80 civilian students. It was given over to the Navy as part of what was called the V5 program, which was a pre-flight training program. Young men who went to Poly, and there were about 3,000 of them who went through the program during World War II, learned navigation, meteorology, of course, military etiquette and discipline, and I'm sure they all enjoyed their daily run up to the Poly P and back. Kind of made up for it is that they got really cheap candy bars and stuff in Morro Bay at the naval station there, and the train was always available, so if they got a weekend pass, they could go to San Francisco or Los Angeles. But about 3,000 pre-flight cadets would go through this program. And this is on the site of today's Hancock College. In World War II, it was Hancock Field. And about 9,000 Army Air Forces cadets went through their primary training, the first step in flight training at Hancock Field. And this is a cartoon I love this cartoon. He's having a little trouble with navigation. He's supposed to be over Los Olivos, but the last time I checked, there were no pyramids there.
Yeah, but
here they are with their Stearman cadets, which were painted yellow and sometimes called the Yellow Peril, just both for the paint scheme and for the frequency with which they were crashed, which was an immediate ticket out of the program, whether you were dead or alive. This is from a yearbook, and this class produced many pilots and one who did not make it as a pilot. He wound up being a bombardier in a B-24 in the Pacific. And of course, his name is Louis Zamperini, and he's the subject of Lauren Hillenbrand's wonderful book, Unbroken, a book I highly recommend, and even more, her book, Seabiscuit, which is absolutely marvelous. One of our most gifted writers. That same class produced 2 4-star generals in the post-war Air Force, 5 fighter aces during World War II. 7 members of this class participated in the Doolittle raid on Tokyo in April of 1942. That's one class.
B-17 or B-24 bomber cruised from England, carried the war to German positions in France and Germany.
How about give a dice, Jay? Well, I don't know this scoring, but I'll watch it once. That's a good idea. Barney, come on. There you are. 40 here. Oh, good. Middle for diddle. Middle for diddle. Go on, Jack. Step up. Here. Put on the mark like that.
Jim, this is actually a training video. Is that right?
Yes, it is. It's how to acclimate to England.
Burgess Meredith. So it doesn't accurately show what the GIs did. One of the things I remember, the slogan that the British had, I think from World War I, was that the Yanks are overpaid, oversexed, and overhear.
Right, and overfed.
And overfed.
My father was stationed in England during the war. He never ate Brussels sprouts again.
All right, take a good aim. Like minute, see? Just level it. Like baseball. All right, just like baseball. Give you muscle. Been here long? No, not very long. What about you? Well, I'm just back myself. Sicily. No? In other places? Why? Where? Dunkirk. Yeah. Crete. El Alamein. That's when we started to go in the right direction. Forward. Good. Where do you come from, mate? Me, I'm from New York. New York? New York City. My missus got a cousin in New York. Here, meet the one. Sure, like Bye. This bloke comes from New York. How do you do? Tell him about your cousin Jim.
Oh, really?
What part of New York does he come from?
Oh, he's at the polo ground.
Does he play baseball?
Oh, no. He sells tickets.
Well, then I probably know him. I bought a lot of tickets.
I know someone in New York, too.
New York? I just come back from there. It's a tough trip now, isn't it?
Not so bad these days.
Could have a drink. I've got one. I'll buy you one. How about that?
Oh, it's okay with you. It's okay with me.
Fine. Say, Scotty, you and your pal have a drink?
Hi. If it's on the least lend.
Sure. And leave that car, okay?
You want to keep these fellas? Now, what can I get you, gentlemen? I'd like whiskey.
Okay.
Now we're ready for you.
2 whiskey.
That's 2 scotch and half a bitter.
That's right.
Miss something at the end of that, Jim? I think we missed something. I thought I'd pause this for a second to let people see. I guess that's the face of Randall Jarrell there.
Yes, he was a North Carolina writer and poet. Most, if not all, high school students have read his poem, The Death of a Ball Turret Gunner.
I remember reading it in my high school class in 1968.
Absolutely froze us to the core.
It did.
And in 1963, soon after the death of President Kennedy, he himself committed suicide.
In spite of everything Kennedy had to
Fires
say.
would wake up in the middle of the night for years after. So PTSD was something that was a part of their lives too.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's every combat veteran has that to contend with.
The thing about children, I just want to interject. One of the things that strikes me about the war is that this was a generation that was a product of the Great Depression. And I'm not saying that Americans were angels, because that would not be true. But something I find very, very common in my research is how they took to children. And they were a source of endless Hershey bars and camaraderie. And there's a wonderful photo that you saw earlier of an airman teaching a British boy how to play baseball. He was a war orphan. So children were something that our soldiers and Marines and sailors were tremendously attracted to. Now, believe it or not, there's a horse story involved with the air war.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim. If you want to just comment a little bit about why Sheila Varian figures in this. She is the the niece of Russell and Sigurd Varian. Their brother, Eric, I believe, was her father. Is that right?
I think so. And she's also the subject, I think, of one of the best stories I've ever written. If anybody wants a copy, I'll be happy to send it to you. This is the best underdog or underhorse story I've ever heard. Rontesa was the daughter, her sire was Vites II, who was a Polish Arabian champion. And Sheila made up her mind thanks to another woman. My sister rode with both Sheila and this woman, Sid Spencer, who lived in the upper Rio Grande Valley and bred Morgan horses and Herefords. Sheila learned how to ride vaquero style, how to be the rider of a cow horse from Sid Spencer. And she became determined to prove that an Arabian could do the same work that a quarter horse could do. So Rontesa was her test case. And at the National Cow Horse Championship in the Cow Palace in San Francisco in 1961, she made her point. They won the championship.
There you go.
But there's a connection between Rontesa and the air war.
Jim, wasn't this the subject of a fairly well-known movie too back in the 60s, early 70s?
Yes, it was.
Do you remember the name of it? The name?
It was Slaughterhouse-Five,
Slaughterhouse-Five.
based
Yeah.
on Vonnegut's novel.
Slaughterhouse-Five, Kurt Vonnegut's novel, which will come up a little bit later here. Let me just return to the. Sorry. Arabian horses were destroyed in the Dresden bombing. 25,000 human beings too. If you all enjoy Mason's Bar in Arroyo Grande, it's got a little history there. The Whitlock's commercial company market in Arroyo Grande is that site. 58 years. Raised her family on East Branch Street. And that home right below what is today Paulding Middle School. One son, Daniel Elliott Whitlock. I love this story. Donkey named Lady Mo. Hit her with an oxygen mask. Can't imagine how they got anything done with the donkey like this. And there's a story about Daniel Elliott Whitlock too. Whitlock was flying a B-17. Okay. I'm going to switch out here. It might interrupt the flow. Would anybody like me to read this to I'll give you a little more time to read it at least. Somehow a fire extinguisher shows up. He doesn't even know how it arrived. Puts out the fire. Turned the damaged bomber toward home. It only gets better. Trying to turn the bomber. They don't have a navigator. They don't have a radio operator. Well, they do have a radio operator, but they're improvising. Trying to dodge flak on the way back over Germany and the rest of the continent. Oh. We're inching along here. Donkey's ears are even bigger than a dog's ears. So next time you go to Mason Bar in Branch Street in Arroyo Grande, think of that guy. This is St. Andrew's Church in England near Snetterton Heath. As you can probably tell, we're getting a little close to the end here. Probably took advantage of the GI Bill.
.25, stationed in an airfield in Papua New Guinea, was flown by a man from Santa Maria. And air to ground, or more accurate, air to sea operations in the Southwest Pacific were a vital part of the war there. And I don't think there's a less desirable place for an American to have served than in Papua New Guinea, where Grover served. One of the B-25s in his bomb squadron had mechanical trouble. After leaving the field, the flight engineer bailed out, landed on an island. He was stuck in a tree and promptly covered from head to toe with ants. Desperately trying to get them out of his ears, nose, and mouth, climbed down from the tree when the first thing he encountered was a Papua New Guinea spider the size of a catcher's mitt. He shot it with his .45. For the appropriately named Colonel Pappy Gunn, the war couldn't end soon enough. Pappy because he was all of 42, and the war couldn't end soon enough because his wife and family were being held captives by the Japanese in Manila. For the kind of combat that the B-25 was intended to carry out, it just wasn't up to the job. Air to ground or air to sea surface combat, it didn't have enough forward-facing guns. Pappy Gunn changed that and replaced that plexiglass nose with 8 forward-mounted 50 caliber machine guns and 2 more in the top turret. That changed the nature of warfare in the Southwest Pacific. Thanks to Pappy Gunn's adaptations, B-25s became lethal against Japanese surface ships in the South Pacific. This is a Mitchell just finishing a strafing run against a Japanese destroyer escort. Now, in one of Roy Lee Grover's missions, in a similar attack, he strafed a Japanese freighter. He flew so low that when he got back to base, one of the ground crew motioned to him. There, draped around the end of the B-25's wing, was the freighter's radio antenna.
My own mother went over on the Queen Mary in World War II also with the Red Cross. I love these English names. Bassingbourn, British-built base. Control tower is still there. This plane was attacked by German fighters. landing safely on the ground, you're not safe in Germany. Luftwaffe soldiers came and treated him as a POW should be treated. They gave him potato soup. But he had to give them his silk parachute so they could make dressing gowns for his captors' wives. They're still unearthing bombs in parts of Germany. Whoops, let me go back and just give you a little more time to read that slide. There's a lot there. I hope you don't mind, Jim, but the Germans who interrogated Mr. Dixon seemed to like him.
And they seem to know everything about him. And this was not uncommon for down flyers.
Yeah. They tried, I'm sure they tried to break them the same way we did them. And
Absolutely.
sometimes, yeah. What a good looking guy though. You could see how.
Yes, he's a handsome guy.
I love this part of the story. Shares his sausage and black bread with him. We're all hot bedded on the Queen Mary too. That's what almost it is. The 86 Texans. Spitfires. Well, Jim.
Yes, John. Thank you so much. I cannot tell you how much I would have rather been there in person.
Well, Jim, you are almost here. The lighting isn't too good, but your voice comes through very well. And
Better
I,
than
I suspect there may be one or two people here that have a question for you.
absolutely.
And we'll start with Ethan, and we'll just go for a few more minutes because I know folks are probably anxious to go on to dinner or something too. But
John, I can't hear.
I'll repeat the question for you, and I'll try to get the microphone closer to him also. But start again here, Jim. Ethan.
Was the person named Grover who served in Papua New Guinea, Grover City / Grover Beach was named after?
Good question. D.W. Grover. There was. Is there any relation between that Grover and the gentleman that you had featured in your PowerPoint?
I looked it up on my trustee.ancestry.com and I could not find a connection. So I guess he settled in Santa Maria after the war. And as much as I would have liked to, I could not find a connection to DW.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that you also saw the hat that's sitting here on the one of the Rigettis. Your name again is you're Ernie's son, right? Craig. So I want to make sure that he can see your hat there, the P-51 Mustang hat.
I kind of have a thing for P-51s. I think it's the most beautiful airplane ever.
I think history still records the P-51 as, for its era, its time, the greatest combat aircraft.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Is the Army still making an effort to recover lost men and women? We went to several trips to San Francisco and San Diego with my uncle, my other uncle, my dad, and I, and there is an effort, but I think it's sort of a lost cause now, 70 some years later.
Yes. From what I know, they're much more active in the Pacific theater than they are in the European theater. By the way, my dad was a quartermaster officer, and tragically at the end of the war, his job was in graves registration. So that's something he did not talk about a whole lot, even though he fought most of his war with a typewriter and adding machine. But in 2017, thanks to the Military Identification Bureau in Hawaii, we brought home to Rio Grande a Marine who had been killed on Tarawa in 1943. They were able to forensically identify his remains, and now he is buried next to his mom in our cemetery. So there is, again, as far as I know, the effort on, at least on the part of those who were lost in the Pacific, is kind of heroic.
I believe there's a fair amount of resources put into a forensics lab there in Hawaii whenever there are remains that are encountered where there's any possibility it might have been an Allied service member, or for that matter, the Japanese themselves too, because they also, as combatants, they were very often, they were drafted to do that kind of work too. They were certainly a lot more enthusiastic about it than we would have liked them to be, but we, I think we do a fair amount of effort is put in to try and repatriate the remains of those who have fallen. Are there other questions for Jim? Oh. Yeah. Okay, that's the question from Mary Parker. And I'll try to find it on chat here. Jim, you want to take that on?
Hold on just a second. Let me get down to chat, John.
Okay. Yeah, I think Jim covered that in an earlier slide. It was a July 4th, 1910 with, was it Lincoln Beachy or Hillary?
It was Hillary Beachy, the big brother. And it was sensational. I mean, it was in the newspapers as far back as the beginning of June. So we were pretty excited about it.
There's an excellent book about the Wright brothers by David Macaulay. Yes, and I would commend it to people. What it brought to me was the knowledge about what people must have felt like back in the very earliest years of the 20th century, never having seen anything but birds in the sky.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, these planes begin to appear, and you realize you're in a different century, and you're looking at a technology that obviously transformed not only transportation but warfare as well. And yeah, Jim, go ahead.
John, that reminds me when the first Pacific Coast Railway locomotive made its first run from San Luis Obispo to Arroyo Grande. A crowd of preteen boys were gathered by the railroad track to hear its approach. And it got within about 200 yards and they all ran away and hid. They'd never heard anything so loud in their life. So I think before the advent of airplanes and automobiles and locomotives, we tend to forget how quiet it was in San Luis Obispo County.
Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth. Hold on, I'm going to bring the microphone over. Pat?
Okay.
Another World War II hero was Mr. I don't know his rank, but his last name was Bubar, and he was mentioned here. And I was wondering if we could see that photograph again and any biographical information you had.
I will try to find it on the slideshow. Yeah. I think I can locate it for you. Meanwhile, are there any other questions for Jim that we'd like to? I'll show it to you on this, and we'll project it up here too.
I have a comment, but it's not a question for Jim.
Go ahead, Craig.
About 30 years ago, I went to a convention in Reno with my dad. And one of the auction items was a half-hour ride in a P-51 with Chuck Yeager. My dad got that, and I don't think there are any barrel rolls or anything else, but he said it was quite an experience.
Yeah, here's a slide with blue bar. I'm gonna go ahead and share this for the whole screen here for everybody. That's someone's not able to see this. Lost the screen share here. We solved that problem earlier, didn't we, Sylvan? I don't know why it isn't working now. But I can show it to you on my screen. So, so I think once again, let's give Jim Gregory a big hand here for all the work he's done for us.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Good job. And Jim, get better, and we will see you out on the circuit again soon. Don't forget, folks, if you know of anybody who might want to take this tour of Mission Plaza, all the way from here down to the Mission, we're starting that again at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll do that every Saturday at 10 o'clock, and through the summer, unless something happens to me. But so far, I've managed to pull this off, and I thank you all for joining us. You will all be getting, if you left your contact information with us on the sign-up sheet, you'll be getting an email, and we'll be asking you to evaluate this Carnegie lecture. Hope to see you at the one in September as well, which will be again Dr. Kathleen Cairns talking about Sen Dalliday, the artist and romantic story, as it might be seen, the daughter of Pierre Hippolyte Dalliday, And we may even do that lecture at the Delegate. We'll see. It'd be kind of
And
fun.
John, one more plug. Don't forget, for the Civil War buffs out there, I'll be leading 2 tours of the Rio Grande District Cemetery. We have 4 veterans of Gettysburg, 7 in the Appomattox campaign, 1 Medal of Honor winner, 1 who saw Abraham Lincoln, and 2 who saw and were nearly dispatched by Crazy Horse.
Oh, okay. I'm excited. I'm going to be there on the 26th again. The 19th and the 26th are the last and the only 2 tours for this summer so far that Jim has scheduled. Go to Cuesta College Community Programs and you can sign up there. And Jim will tell you to look for the blue flag in that cemetery.
Thanks,
And,
thanks everybody for your forbearance.
thank you. Take care, Jim. Bye-bye.